business, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the traditional custodians of the land around Australia, our Indigenous peoples, and their ongoing connection to the land, the sea, and the sky. I'd also like to give our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in the room today. So thank you. My name's Adam Seedsman. I'm the Acting Deputy Head of the Australian Space Agency. Thanks very much for coming. You're here for the Moon to Mars consultation. It's a very exciting day for us. In September last year, when the Prime Minister was in the US and he announced our partnership with NASA and the support for Australian businesses and researchers to join Moon to Mars, it was really exciting. And we knew that we'd have to get out and come and talk to people and learn about those activities that are happening in Australia. When I was walking over here this morning, I was reflecting the last time I stood up here and spoke to the audience in this room, it was in about September or so in 2018. The Australian Space Agency had just been established, and we were getting out and talking to people to ask about how we should move forward, how we should implement a strategy to grow Australia's space sector and how we could implement the International Space Investment Initiative. And it's really pleasing to look back today and in particular reflect on last week, which was a hugely important week for us. We opened our new headquarters down in South Australia at Adelaide at the Lot 14 site there, which is great for us. It was really exciting to have the Prime Minister there on stage and talk about our strategy for growing Australia's space sector. And this Moon to Mars investment is a really integral part of that. The strategy sets out a vision for setting the seeds for growth and for engaging in opportunity. And that's what we're doing today. We're engaging in opportunity. The opportunity for Australia to work with NASA and to be an integral part of that program. And we really want to hear your views on how we should do that. And that's really the purpose of today. I'm here with my colleagues, Campbell Pegg, who'll be talking about this today, Thomas Dover-Ray over there, Sue Argy, and Joe Andrews, who I'm sure all of you know. Would also like to let you all know that we will be broadcasting today's session via YouTube, so you can always go back and watch it, or tell your friends to watch it if you got something special out of it. Cam will go through the proceedings, and we will be here for a while, so we've got plenty of opportunity to ask questions. Cam will tell you how to do that through Slido, but we'll also be hanging around afterwards if you want to ask any questions of us. So again, thanks very much for coming. I encourage you all to engage in this opportunity and help us deliver the best program that we can. So thanks very much.
Hello, morning everyone. Oh, I think that's a bit loud. Morning everyone, thank you very much for coming, and I'm glad to see so many faces here today. So there's probably about 90 of you, which is one of the biggest crowds we've had so far, and that's great because it's in Canberra. So the very first thing I'd like to start off with today is a bit on what brings you here. I mean, I understand that this says Moon to Mars, so that's obviously a big draw card. There is also $150 million investment from the federal government, so that's also another big draw card. But what actually brings you here? What is the thing that brings you to the space industry? And for me, it was quite I would say a simple thing that happened when I was at Sydney University. I actually believe that I liked space. It was a lot of fun. I saw some amazing things in it, but I said, you know what? I'm Australian. It's not going to happen for me. It's someone else. It's a US or a Russian job. Until some Germans came down to my university and they said, Campbell, how about you apply for this space station design workshop in Germany for a week? The course was free, so I was a student at the time, so that was a plus. It was around Oktoberfest time as well, so this is also a plus. So I thought the worst would happen, I'd just go to Germany for 3 weeks and then come back. So the first day I got there was a building that's 5 stories tall, dedicated purely to space engineering. The professor who was in charge of the program was an ex-astronaut, so he's been on the International Space Station. And I do remember the first day we were trying to line out what a space station we could design was. It was only a week, so you can't get too much out in that time. But the very first question he asked us, he goes, okay, after hearing our presentation, he goes, what's your delta V? I was like, I don't know. Okay, that's going to drive your propulsion system, which is going to drive your mass, which is going to drive how many people you're going to send up. And from there, I realized I really didn't know anything about this whole industry, and that was the part that excited me. So I packed up my bags, I went overseas, and I studied overseas for a bit, and then I worked at two companies, OHB System and Airbus, and I was lucky enough to work on ExoMars 2016. So presently I do have, there's a satellite that's actually orbiting Mars right now that I was able to work on. And then my last project I work on as well was the Orion spacecraft as a system engineer. So that's the human spacecraft that's going to go to the moon quite soon. So I was very, very happy to be able to work on those ones. The biggest part for me, though, I realized while over there were two key takeaways immediately that was quite obvious. The very first one was that getting to space and operating in space is difficult. It really is. It's a really big challenge. I know NASA and a lot of other companies make it look easy, but it isn't. And everything they do is about trying to make sure there's a huge amount of reliability and they're capable of working in such a hostile environment. And you can see from the program that is sort of coming out quite regularly, that about getting stuff into space is really a key priority for us. The second part that I realized very quickly was partnerships. Partnerships were absolutely paramount to do anything in the space industry. And a really good example was when the Artemis program was actually proposed by NASA, they actually went to the European Space Agency and said, hey, can you help us? Now, can NASA build a spacecraft, a human spacecraft, to go to the moon? Yes, they did it in the 60s. So there's no issues on technical capability, but they still did go to Europe and ask them, say, can we partnership on this? So if NASA needs to partner on a mission like this, then it's clear that anyone in the Australian industry needs to partner quite heavily to make sure that we can achieve the tasks at hand. So there were the big two takeaways that I found out. But the biggest thing is, and the question I asked before was, what brings me here? And the reason is because right now the space industry is going through a major transformation. It's going from this sort of governmental model that was already being set up from the 60s onwards, and now we're moving into a bit more of a commercial orientation side. And I do feel that the international space industries are struggling to find out exactly what this is going to turn into. And Australia has this real opportunity now to be able to sort of jump into this area quite quickly and carve out a little niche for themselves. And so this is the part that really brings me here today, is I really want to see what you can do for Australia, but at the same time I want to see what Australia can really do for the world. So knowing all of that, I might start this presentation a bit about the Moon to Mars initiative that we've proposed. So I'll get straight into it. So other than asking what brings you here today, what is the purpose of today? And this is really about trying to get your feedback. We have a program for 150 million, and we're putting our proposal down to exactly what we're expecting, but we want to hear your feedback. And we're going to be doing this through a few mechanisms. The first one is obviously through public consultation, which is what we're doing now, but we're going to every state. And the biggest thing was, if there was only one person that turned up to that state, we still were going to attend. So it's very important for us to get the input from all the states for this program. The second area, the way you can actually get your feedback is through consultation@space.gov.au, and by the 6th of March, we'd like to hear your written consultations as well. So please provide that. Once it's in writing, it makes it significantly easier for us. But there is the third one, and I'll talk about it in the next slide as well, but Slido. We have slido.com, hashtag M2M Canberra. And from there, we'll be going back and forward into Slido, and I'll explain a little bit more, but this is the other form that we can take to get your feedback. And this is a very powerful tool. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There are toilets that are down the road, down the hall, down from here, and also the exits are in this direction as well. The other aspect too, if you are from the media, please put all your inquiries to media@space.gov.au. And the other thing I do ask is that we keep a lot of the questions today about the program. I know there's a lot of questions about the agency that are outside the realm of this program. I'd ask that you can put them to inquiries.space.gov.au. So really, we try and keep to the program just so we make sure that we get the best feedback we can. So, A little bit of a runner today, just to sort of prepare you about what's going to happen. I'll be doing a bit of presenting at the beginning. It's actually around about half an hour, so sit back and enjoy. And then we actually have a little bit of a Slido questionnaire where we're going to ask you to enter a lot of things on Slido. And then after that, I'll bring it to the forum, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion. And then we go back to presenting, Slido, and then questions. And we do this about 3 times. So we're going back and forward a little bit between this form, but just so you know, we do have specific times that we're going to be asking questions. I'd ask that you keep your questions to these specific times. Just with 100 people, it gets quite difficult to have questions going throughout the presentation. The other thing as well, as I said, slido.com on your phone, please. If you need Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi password's up there, but it's hashtag M2M Canberra, and then you can log in and you'll see the questions pop up when at the specific time. So you can try this now or you can try it at the times. I will warn you when it comes up, but it's normally when this sign at the bottom here turns up. Afterwards as well, please stick around. We have some food, we have some coffee, and you can start this networking or teaming that I was been talking about at the beginning. Right, so let's give a bit of the broader context of what's happening today. Is that you guys probably all know the Prime Minister said there was 150 million that we're giving to Australian businesses and Australian researchers to be in line with the Moon to Mars program that's from NASA. But this is actually a part of the broader strategy that we're doing. So this is a big, a key aspect to do to deliver the actual agency strategy as well. And just a little bit of a reminder of what that strategy is, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But I know you have heard this before, so I'll try and go through it quite quickly for you. Now I want to get the vision right, so I'll read it directly. So the vision is for a globally respected space sector that lifts the broader economy and inspires and improves the lives of Australians. So how will we do this? And it's through 4 pillars. The very first one is international, and this is for the agency to actually open the doors. So open doors that won't actually previously open to Australian industry and the Australian government before. The second pillar is national, and this is sort of twofold. The first one is to leverage the capability we have today, but also address the challenges that we need to address to make sure we have a vibrant space industry. The third one is responsible. So we want to create a culture of responsibility to ensure that we're working in an ethical and also under the international obligations that we have actually signed. And the very fourth one is inspire. I believe most people we get behind this, is that we're here to really bring and inspire the public and also the future generation to get into the space industry or even adjacent industries as well. So that's the overarching vision of the agency. What's happened after this is that we've identified 7 areas that we really that we've put as our priorities. And these 7 areas, I know you've all heard before, but we'll just run through them quickly just so we're on the same page. The very first one is position, navigation and timing. The second is Earth observation. The third is communications. Then there's situational awareness, leapfrog R&D, robotics and automation, and access to space. So these are the real priority areas that we're focusing on at the agency, and we'll be implementing them over 10 years. So we won't be implementing them all at once, but we'll be firstly implementing the Earth observation and position, navigation and timing, and you can see this through SBAS and also through Digital Earth Australia. And then we'll be starting to move online with the next ones as well. And you can see there's a bit of a phasing pattern happening here. So that's the overarching strategy and priorities of the agency. So let's get to the program. So now we're going to try and get through the crux of the program. Just to give you a warning, we'll start with the basic of the program outlay, and then we're going to go into each of these individual sections in more detail, and then we'll start having some question time at the end of each of these. So the first one is, we have 150 million, how we're going to divide it. It's roughly going to be divided equally between the supply chain program, the demonstrator program, and the Trailblazer program. Now the supply chain program is about trying to get Australian products and services into the international space supply chain. That's really the main aim of it. The second one is the demonstrator program, and this is about really trying to get your stuff into space. So it's investment-ready items that really we want to get into space or start connecting with things that are in space today. So really give that lift-off that your company needs. And then the third aspect is the Trailblazer program, and this is sort of the one program, the one mission that's just sort of going to be the thing that Australians are proud of. So we're looking at one mission that all Australians can get behind that sort of represents Australia. And a good example is in Canada was the Canadian arm that they did. And so we are wanting to sort of find a program like this, not the Canadian arm, but we're trying to find something like this that Australians can be proud of and say, this is really Australian. Right. So as you probably noticed down below, Slido is now opened up for some of the questions. We're having a few Slido questions through this presentation, but there won't be any questions to the forum just yet. But we wanted to get your input on this next part, and it's a bit about the objectives of the program. So these are all the objectives. I won't go through all of them with you, but the three top objectives that I see is really the whole Moon to Mars initiative is to demonstrate Australian capabilities to the world, really accelerate the growth and economic targets of the agency. So that's 20,000 jobs and 12 billion in the economy in the next 10 years. And the third is really to inspire the public to get in and engaged with the space industry. But we really want to hear what you think the objectives should be, and which do you think are the main objectives of the program that we should focus on. So this is in Slido as you see now, so if you can answer this, this would be fantastic. If you're not using Slido, this is no problem. You can obviously give your answers vocally, but at the right times. So we'll have a specific question time for you then. So I'll give you 30 seconds. Well, I'll give you a minute. And then after this, I'll move on to the next slide. You guys didn't think we're going to make you work during this process, did you? So I'll say the real advantage of this right now is that when you write it down, it's very clear. From us. So it is actually directly from you, and it's not just the loudest person getting their input here. So we go through all of this data and we check to see exactly what the public want, and we can't really, it's impossible to sort of deny what you guys are saying because it's written down there for us. So these inputs are really helpful to ensure that we get the best program out there. Also as well, if you're having any technical problems, just find some of the people from the agency around you and they can help you as well. So this is the only one that has an incy bit of time pressure. It's just because we get to the next slide, it gets turned off. So in about 30 seconds, I really ask you to press save, because once we turn it off, it doesn't get saved. Okay. So just start pressing save now, and then we'll move to the next slide. Fantastic. Okay, moving now. So what this next slide is about is that the agency put out its priorities and those 7 areas that I discussed before, and then we listened to the public to understand sort of what are we actually capable of achieving in the next 5 years? And this is sort of what we heard from the public today. And so we wanted to get a little bit more feedback on this as well. And this is the 5 priority areas that we sort of see that we can leverage what we have in Australia already, so that huge capability that we have already in Australia, what we can leverage today to actually achieve something of significance within the next 5 years. And the areas are in situ resource utilisation. This is coming from the mining industry. Remote operations with artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is also coming from the mine industry. You might see there's a lot of mining industry aspects here. Then we also have space medicine and life sciences. This actually popped out of the Leapfrog R&D. So when we put the priority area of Leapfrog R&D out there, people came back from the Antarctic division and said, hey, we've got an amazing capability down here that's actually some of the best in the world, dealing with remote medicine in the Antarctic. And we've said, yes, that's true, that's amazing. So we've put it up here to say, you know what, we could do something with this inside the space industry because it's a very similar capability. Then the last two we have is digital mapping of celestial bodies. So this is leveraging off what GA has done on Digital Earth Australia. So we're seeing maybe we could bring this out to Mars or into the moon as well. And then the very last one was next generation communications. So Australia is apparently at a very good level for communication, especially ground-based. And we wanted to see what we can leverage inside this for the Space Agency as well. So these are the 5 areas that we're looking at. So we're asking you here, do you see anything else? Do you see that these are the 5 areas that we can leverage to provide something of significance within the next 5 years? And is there anything else we're missing? Is there some other area in Australia that we see as an amazing attribute that we have that we could leverage? I'll take your questions in the time, so sorry. So it's on Slido. If you have some answers to this, please enter them here. And I'll give you some time just to enter this and then we'll move to the next slide. But we don't have as much time pressure on this one, so so you do have a bit more time to answer it. Fantastic. I'll give you, I think this doesn't get turned off for a little bit. Thomas, when does this get turned off? It's at least... Okay, so we have a little bit more time. I'll start the next slide, but then please try and save it within the next minute. Right, there's also the last thing, just a little bit of an overview of the timeline. We do go into the specifics of this, but just of the program. The supply chain, we're aiming in July to get the grants open, the initial grants open in July this year, so in the next 3 to 4 months. And this is going to be administered all the way through 2025, so don't worry, if you've missed July, it will still be available in 2021, 2022. You still have the capability of still applying for these grants, and I'll go into the details of this soon. The demonstrator program, this is really in late 2020, so we're aiming for October. This would be out to start the applications for this. So we have about 6 months to really start getting a good proposal and teaming going. So we heard before that we needed a bit of time to really get these proposals working, so hopefully this is going to be enough time for you, but I'll go through the details in the next steps. And then the Trailblazer, we're going back to public consultation late this year. So we're really trying to focus on the top 2 to really get those out as quick as we can and get that money into the public. But at the same time, the Trailblazer is also in the background that we're running at the same time. But we want to go back to the public again in end of this year. Right, supply chain. So let's go into the details here. I'll go through the supply chain. So I still have some more presenting. Then we'll actually have a specific thing on Slido. And then we'll have question time. So I know it's a little bit of talking from me, but then we will have question. I'll open it up for quite a long time so you guys can have your say. Good. So how the supply chain program will work. We're actually going to be breaking this down into 3 components. The very first one is the capability grants. The second part is the supply chain engagement and facilitation. And the third is concurrent activities. So what this is that we realize that to really get into the supply chain, we do have to raise some of the capabilities and capacity of the Australian industry. So this is what these grants are aimed at, is really trying to raise Australian capability and capacity. The second aspect is about really trying to get the buyer to come to us. So, for a sale, you have to have the buyer and the supplier. So we're trying to the first one's trying to raise our capacity and capability, but then the second one's really trying to get the buyer to the table as well. And then the third one is really about the activities that the agency are doing behind the scenes. So just to let you know that we are doing work specifically related to the Moon to Mars initiative, where we're trying to push for further governmental relationships to occur, leveraging other governmental programs inside other parts of the government. So different areas here to really help with this facilitation, but also doing things that the Australian Space Agency can do, but not really so much what the industry can do. So really trying to push as much as we can behind the scenes. So I'll go a little bit into this, but just so you understand, the funding is that we're the capability grants and the supply chain, they're around about equally funded. So it's half-half for them, and the concurrent activities is just personnel time from the agency. So this is the capability grant. The first part is that this is open competitive. There's sort of two options that we're going for here that we haven't narrowed down yet, but the aspects are still very similar for you guys. The first is an open competitive grant or regular rounds. They're the two options that we have at the moment. But the main aspect is that if you can apply this year, you can apply next year, you can apply the year after, you can apply the year after that. So we do have a bit of time. It's really about trying to get that capability up inside the industry. The grants at the moment are between $250,000 and $1 million, so in that sort of level. We also will have an expert panel and a panel delegate to keep it obviously fair and equitable. And this will be delivered through business.gov.au. This will start in July, and as I said before, funding will be until 2025. So we have funding until this time. The key aspect here is around about what activities do we see as eligible for the grant. And for us, it's really about any activity that's going to help you get into the supply chain. That's really the main aspect. And obviously, we need a little bit of feedback from you about what those activities are. But I'll tell you what the activities that we see. Sometimes it's more about the development of the technology. So not a huge amount, but sometimes if you're from an adjacent industry or some technology, you just need a little bit more to get there, to get into the supply chain. We could see activities around this, sort of the development of the product, to really sort of bridge that gap to get into the supply chain. The other area is qualifications. This is normally a very big part of the space industry. So a lot of the question is that when the buyer comes to you and says, okay, how good is your product? The answer is, it's great. And then they go, prove it. And then you say, with what? And the answer is testing. And that's normally money. So this is sort of where we're coming back, is that qualification process needs to be done. And to sort of prove that reliability, prove that your product is capable of what you're saying it is capable of doing. A development from adjacent industries, so let's say, for example, in the mining industry, if you had a sensor that works very well in the mining industry, then sometimes there's also activities around this about transferring it over into an international supply chain for the space industry. There'll be some work behind that, so areas to fund along that sort of area. Also, capital equipment can be included on this. So if you're in the supply chain already and you need to increase your capacity, then this could be a good way to do it. And then the last one we've put here is also workforce training and accreditations. But there's many other areas. So we know that sometimes that you have to have different areas of compliance to get into the supply chain. And so all of these activities are encompassed by these grants. The biggest area is the merit criterion. This one means that you'll be preferentialized depending on how well you're on the merit criteria. But we want, obviously, the majority of the funding to stay in Australia. We're not here to fund international organisations. We're here to fund Australian companies. But we do understand sometimes you have to use something international. Have support of the buyer. This, for me, is the biggest part. We're not doing a build it and they will come. It is, you should already have a pretty good alignment with the buyer. And I will be posing some questions here about how much support do you guys want this to see. But for me, one of the things I would, as absolutely the best way to go it, is that the buyer should even be in your proposal with you. So they should be this involved. To say, yes, with this amount of money, we're going to get you across the line. The second part is enhanced capability. and a competitive edge. So these are the next two. And this is really about trying to create something that's unique. So if you create something of actual significant value inside the supply chain, the chance of you being removed from it is very small. But if we've just found the stars have aligned properly, and we've managed to get, let's say, a bolt transferred between an Australian company into the international supply chain, well, I promise when this program's finished, then that bolt is going to be very easily transferred out of the supply chain. So we want something that's going to stick. That's the real case, and that means it has to be something unique and has a competitive advantage to leveraging the capability we have today. Co-funding and in-kind contribution, it is expected that you'd be bringing half of your the money to the table as well, so that we are expecting you to match fund here. And at the same time as well, we want this in line with the national priorities. So we really want to start focusing our energy on specific priority areas to really get that, to really focus the cash in that area. So we're nearly going to get to question time. I know it's a long time of me speaking, but we're nearly there. So just 2 more slides. Yes, 2 more slides, and then we go to Slido and then questions. So capability grant. Just a few more examples that we could flesh out for you, but we really want to hear your possibilities as well through the Slido session. So the first one is, as I said, this transfer of technology, and I explained that before, so I won't go into it again. But there's also as well for scenario 2 here, cybersecurity. We know security can be a little bit more demanding inside the space industry, so hence an upgrade of your security systems could also be included in this grant program. And then the last part we have here is process improvements. And this is sort of more on the assembly line. Normally in the space industry, it's very methodical. You've got run sheets of exactly what you should be doing, and it would be normally signed off by quality assurance during this process. And those processes are normally being tested heavily already to prove that they are reliable. So you can't have a product that every 1 or 2 of them that don't work every 3 or 4 products that you produce. It needs to be highly reliable through your manufacturing process. And normally that process, the manufacturing process, is normally tested heavily as well. So then areas like this can also be going for funding, but also tooling areas to improve. Sometimes the standards are a little bit higher inside the space industry, so hence tooling is another area that we could see that funding could go through as well. I'll go into the supply facilitation, and then we go to Slido, so nearly there. So the first one, this is the second part. Before, this is all about trying to raise the capability of Australians, but this time is all about trying to get the buyers to come to us, and we see that we're going to partner with the primes. And when we say primes right now, we mean Lockheed Martin, we need Boeing, we mean Airbus, we mean Northrop Grumman, and we're missing one out of this, which is the last one, Airbus, Thales Alenia, there we go, and Thales Alenia as well. So we're seeing that the Australian Space Agency would partner with them, and during this partnership we'd be asking them to develop opportunities for Australian companies to enter their supply chain, provide mentoring to Australian companies, also as well sharing information for your exports, and at the same time connecting you with key decision makers inside their organisation. So this is through our partnership we would be aiming to push these areas. The proposed governance of this, just to make sure it's all clear and equitable between the partnerships that we have. The first one would have regular reporting between us and these primes. The second one is that the agency would ensure that we have appropriate access to all companies out there. So it's not just to specific ones, it would be for everyone. And then we may also get these reports released to the public so you can see exactly what's going on behind the scenes. This won't start until July 2021, so we have another year and a bit until this starts working. So, between now and then, we're asking these companies to prove to us that they want to be a part of this. So we're wanting them to not wait until the money comes in. We're saying it's time, you have to start as now and show us what you can do, so you have the proof that without any of this partnership you've done this much, and then obviously the partnership would help you a little bit further along the way. So we're really asking them to come to the party now. So now this is the Slido section, and then we'll open it up to everyone for questions. So this is the fun part as well. So the very first one was, are there capability gaps? And basically, what are the top 3 things that are sort of the gaps that we see between this sort of buyer-seller relationship? What are the 3 things that we're missing? We really want to understand this. So what sort of things would we be funding? Where should we focus our energy to really get this supplier-buyer relationship going on? Is it getting access to the right people? Is it actually a capacity problem or a capability problem inside Australian industry? Is it an internal desire of Australians not to really enter the supply chain? They want to go by themselves. Okay, I'll go to the next question. What would encourage the adoption of Australian capabilities into the international supply chain? So what from my side is, what do we need to encourage this? So specifically from the buyer relationship. So what do we need to really do to encourage this? I must say this is the first group I've seen furiously typing everything going on, so you guys must have a lot to say. No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that at the end. Okay. Third question. Are there other activities that you think should be supported by this grants? So what else? I've mentioned a whole bunch, such as tooling, processing, qualifications, that sort of stuff. Do you see any other areas that should be funded as well? So other areas that you would like to see these capability grants funding? What would you like the money to be used for? And the last question is to do with this, the partnership between the agency and the primes. So basically the international space organisations. How would you like this partnership to be? What would you like this partnership to be? What do you think, what sort of partnership brings them best to the table to really start getting Australian companies into their supply chain? This, I think, is a great crowd for it because you guys are dealing with this constantly from a day-to-day basis. So, I'll give it 30 seconds. This will be left open so you guys can keep answering more and more aspects. Also, when someone says something, you can say, I thought of something else. please, this will be left open for a bit, so don't worry. We will give you a warning, I think, this time when we do close it. So just so you remember to press save, because we had 1 or 2 people last time didn't press save and lost all their work. Okay. So let's bring this to the forum. Right, does anyone have any questions? No? Fantastic, great program, I think. If you guys need some more time to keep writing, I can give you another minute if you'd like, and then we can bring it to the question time. Right, let's start this off then. So the objectives, what do you guys think of the objectives at the moment? Do you think they're in line with what you guys, that will help? Is there any comments on the objectives? I will ask if anyone has a question or comment, please state who you are and where you're from, so what company you're representing. And then also I'd ask, I know that you'll be wanting to ask questions, but please put it in the form of proposal. What would you like this to be? So don't say, answer me this please. Can you say, I would like this program to do this please? That would be the best way. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Yes.
Sore throat. Duncan Blake, International Aerospace Law and Policy. Thank you. So one of the objectives is.
It's on.
One of the objectives is set pathways for responsible behaviour in space-related activities.
Mm-hmm.
So what I wanted to know is that simply compliance with current regulatory regimes or something proactive. I think it should be the latter. I can expand on why it should be the latter, but that's my question.
So regulation, I guess, is the line that you're moving for here.
Yeah, and whether we should be proactive or simply complying with current regulatory regimes.
You really start off with the difficult questions from the beginning. Would you like to answer this one, Adam? Or?
G'day, Duncan. Thanks very much for the question. In the spirit of consultation, in your submission, tell us how you think it should go. So we'd like to think we're more responsive and proactive. I mean, as you know, one of the first things that we've done is update the space activities regulation here in Australia. For us, this program is very much about setting the right behaviours in the Australian space sector, encouraging responsible behaviours, and I guess being proactive about how we do that, and supporting Australian businesses and researchers in how they engage in those responsible activities. So this is one of those opportunities for us to do that, and if you'd like to see us behave in a certain way or deliver a particular service, change a regulation in a particular way, tell us. That's what the consultation is for. Does that kind of answer your question? Excellent, thanks so much.
So I guess the question for you is, what would you like the regulation to be? What would you like to see from the regulatory side?
Well, that's a really complex question.
There's a microphone just behind you.
Thank you. There was a question elsewhere about, is there anything missing from the program? And what I've put is future casting. And the reason I put that future casting is that to understand the consequences of what we're embarking upon and thinking in the future of bringing it down to the present, can we take actions now to reduce the negative consequences of what we're going to do and enhance the positive consequences? So I think if we do some future casting, we can better come up with how we can be proactive about regulation globally and not just for Australia.
Fantastic. Well, that's a very good question. So the first cab off the rank, I like it. There was a question right next to you, actually. Makes it a bit easier for Sue.
Steve Hobbs, Masters University student. So reflecting on the supply chain program and funding for Australian Space Agency, so just wondering what the considerations are for empowering future generations. So I'm thinking of STEM, I'm thinking of empowering universities to conduct the research and development in small bodies of work that produce direct achievable outcomes.
So I know there's a question for me, but I'm gonna throw it back onto you as well. What would you like to see from this? Knowing that it is a supply chain, so the aim of this program is to get Australian space industry get Australian industry into the supply chain. What would you like to see the money spent on? Would you like the money to be spent on STEM work?
As a matter of fact, I would, in terms of perhaps one of the supply chains might be developing a practical CubeSat demonstrator to teach school-aged children. There's a practical demonstrable outcome which with funding would achieve results at the same time as encouraging and empowering the future generation of researchers and space people.
Okay, fantastic. I'll put that question to the crowd a bit more, because that's actually a question that pops up quite a bit. They say, hey, it's one of your pillars, but it's not clearly stated in any of the programs here. I would state that for us, one of the key areas for inspiration is actually the achievement of what we're doing. And you'll see in the Trailblazer, this is really the STEM aspect. So we want to demonstrate to the world that we can do this and inspire them along the way by showing them what we can do. That's a big aspect. But I do actually, a lot of people have asked this specifically, would you like to have more STEM activities included in programs like this? Anyone from the, yes, just wait for the microphone, sorry to.
Sorry, I've been keen to answer a question as well, but I'll ask one. I'll answer this one. My view as an engineer of a couple of decades is that technical management is the big hole in this STEM thing. We have lots of young people who are keen and smart. We don't really have managers who can take that to the next level.
How do you mean? Could you detail a bit further? So you mean, so when we start talking about getting programs like this, they're just the STEM program that people can't...
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I think the enthusiasm at the school level and even university and graduates is pretty high, and there are really good people around. But organisations that can take those people and really make use of their talents and thereby inspire the next generation are a bit few and far between.
Okay, interesting. That's a really good comment, thank you. Do we have any other comments on the program, the supply chain, or the program there? There's a lady at the front here, Sue, that put her hand just here.
Hi, I'm Penny King from Australian National University. I'm a science co-investigator on the Mars Curiosity rover, Science Laboratory Curiosity rover. And there are lots of students, I have 40 a year, who want to do planetary science. They don't see where to go. Work-integrated learning programs would help them know where to go. That would be one way of improving STEM outcomes and jobs also. But I don't see in your program ways that I in a university can continue partnering with NASA.
The science question comes up quite a lot.
The science is not in your program, I'm sorry to say.
So
and NASA has, more than 50% science and exploration funds in their 2020 budget. It's the basis of their programs.
So what I'll do, I'll hold this question until the demonstrator program comes out, because there is a lot more, I see that in science can partake a lot more on the next part, a lot more on this side, but we are wanting your feedback from this. So we have exactly had these comments coming back, where does science fit into all of this? But I just put your hand up when the demonstrator program, we have the question time for there, and I'll like to answer this question a bit more directly. So yes, the gentleman to the left here.
Thank you. Steve Gow from the Space Environment Research Centre. A comment more than a question around supply chain. So does anyone in the agency know what Lockheed's looking for or Boeing's looking for example, the prime? So there's a real relationship brokering sort of thing there to understand industry capabilities and what the primes are actually looking for. So that's one of the things I think is actually may well be missing in from that program, if you like.
So I will say we have started the dialogue with them now, and we are leveraging relationships that we already have in the government to foster exactly this. So they are engaged now. We are meeting directly with them. So we didn't want to wait until this was out. We have started that immediately. But it is a very good point. That was brought up in Sydney as well, saying, hey, what are you doing with them? So around the question of this, it's a little bit linking a little bit to this, but there was the question of the buyer. Who do you guys define as the buyer? This is I think is a really good question that I wouldn't mind bringing to the audience as well. Right now that we're talking about with our engagement facilitation, we're having a direct relationship with companies that are here already. But of course, with the capability grants, that's not restricted to that. You don't have to, the buyer doesn't have to be those companies. You can choose other companies as well, and that might help with our relationship. But I'd like to understand a little bit of what you guys think who the buyer should be when we come to the capability grants. Yes, gentleman down here in the black shirt. Just, there's a microphone coming down, sorry.
Kirk Mackenzie, Australian National University. I was the payload manager for the laser interferometer on Grace Follow-On mission when I was at NASA. My question goes to the capability grant. So you mentioned the term buyer. Sometimes I hear agency for that. Specifically for working with NASA, I know that in a recent grant application, NASA decided not to support any particular grant. So when I hear a buyer in your application, has NASA changed their position on this, or is NASA excluded as a buyer?
So typically the buyer won't be NASA. It would be Lockheed, Boeing, but also SpaceX. You can bring SpaceX to the table, or any of these companies. They're a much easier buyer to deal with than it is with, in some sense, NASA. Sometimes it's quite difficult working directly with an agency, mainly because they do have restrictions around them. But the other companies, no, they don't. So it's a little bit easier.
So the agencies are excluded?
I mean, if you can get them to the table, then go for it. But we're not dealing. We are talking directly to NASA, but it's not about this. It's more to do with getting them to talk to their suppliers to then start going down as well. So, I mean, if you do bring them to the table, but I please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to state anything that's incorrect here, but I do believe there is issues with transferring money between one country to the next, specifically from a government agency. So we have to see.
That's incorrect.
Okay, so then could you please then elaborate? That would be probably easier.
So we're just setting up a contract for Australian, for ANU's space interferometry expertise to be used by NASA under 2 missions that have been funded in the future. One's it's an astronomy mission for launch in the mid-2030s, and the other one's a Grace Follow-On, which is a Earth Science water monitoring mission, which Australia has a lot of expertise in, actually.
Could you explain a little bit? Could you explain a little bit of what you guys are doing in this?
So my former role, so I was 12 years at NASA. I was at JPL. I went as a postdoc, but then I ended up becoming the manager for the payload for the laser interferometer. This is a tech demo on the Grace Follow-On mission. So
Fantastic! Congratulations.
Thank you. So it works really well. That's the good part.
So we do have these optical experts down here. Fantastic. I'll have to talk to you a bit later.
Yeah, I'd love to speak with you. So our expertise is broad. We don't have the same resources as an agency like that, but we can help them out in a number of different areas in terms of design, in terms of testing, in terms of R&D that goes along in pushing these new instruments, which is what Grace Follow-On laser interferometer was the first time we'd done anything like that, and it was a factor of 100 better than the microwave. So anyway, we have a lot of expertise in here, and I think engaging with agencies in particular works quite well with universities because they have a lot of capabilities to actually implement hardware and that sort of thing, but the research that behind that, they really feel supported, and this happened in this particular mission because it was a US-German partnership in particular, and the lead German institution was Max Planck Institute, University of Hanover.
Mm-hmm. Are you funded directly by the agency, or is it done through another university to you?
So this is, it's a contract. It's through Jet Propulsion Lab.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Which is not an agency, but an agency contractor.
Okay.
But being involved in a mission, though, gets you in the door and talking to those companies. That's the direct route.
I will come directly back to you after the demonstrator, so it's going to get to you, I promise you there. The lady down the front here. So we'll take 2 more questions here, and then I think the gentleman over to the back there, and then we'll call it from there.
Sarah Pearce from CSIRO. I'm interested in your definition of buyer. So I quite understand the aim towards...
Just 1 second, guys. Sorry, could just be quiet while she's speaking,
towards
please.
industry and primes. It says here space global supply chain. Are you particularly interested in people who supply to NASA, or are you interested in people who supply to any space agency or space activity?
I'm going to throw the question back to you. What would you like this to be? Would you like it everyone? Would it like to ultimately then lead back to NASA? What would be ultimate for you guys?
Well, I think that partly depends on the government's aims for the programme, right? If your aim is to put companies into the Moon, Mars, NASA programme, then a supplier who supplies to that programme, though not necessarily to NASA because it is an international programme, would make sense. If your aim is more to just encourage Australian capability into any space global supply chain, then of course it doesn't matter so much.
So I try not to answer the questions. I'm trying to get you guys to answer them as well. But they're
I
definitely...
think Scott Morrison needs to answer that one.
No. I mean, for us, it's about trying to build the capabilities so we can eventually get into this. So it's the step before. So a lot of people are always thinking this has to go to the moon, this has to go to Mars. It's not the case. It's about building the capability in Australia. And these, while entering a supply chain, there's a lot of knowledge transfer that happens here about getting our products into space. So for us, but we need your feedback. So if you say, look, we want it to everyone, because it's much easier for us to come back and say, look, at the moment it's written in a certain way, but the public want the buyer to be everyone, then it's a much easier way to do this. So do you want to answer any further on this, Adam? Or?
From my point of view, I think it would be a more open process if the buyer was able to be everyone. It will be quite difficult to get buyers on board, I think, in some of these cases. And, you know, if you've got JAXA or somebody who's willing, or some supplier to JAXA who's willing to start working with you, it would be a shame to rule that out.
I can say with confidence that we've not ruled that out, Sarah. So I think what we really want to do is hear from you about the opportunities. So ultimately, this is very much about getting Australian businesses and researchers as a part of that return to Moon and on to Mars. But we don't necessarily have to lock it down. We're not looking for necessarily a direct supply chain to NASA. Perhaps it's through JAXA, perhaps it's through ESA, perhaps it's through a different prime. Tell us about what you think it should be. We're in the discovery phase on this. We want to make sure that we don't leave any rock unturned as we design the program.
A very common question that we're asking, the definition of the buyer, please. That's the... but I like your feedback, 100%. Thank you. Yes, the gentleman there in the white shirt.
Good morning. Adriano Di Pietro from Xtech. We're a small Australian, or an SME. If I could, I'd like to comment on the last. It's my belief, I've at least cited in that way, but I believe it has to be anyone. And strongly, the purpose of a strong supply chain the definition of supply chain goes many layers deep. And if it's not anyone, there'll always be a step where we will eventually have to go offshore for our electronics, for our sensors. And I think that's an important part of what this program should bring. So that's my view. But the question I had was, the program seems to promote a supply chain, let's just say in a bottoms-up manner, but then looks at foreign primes for the end answer. So it's great that it could be to anybody. Let's build some capability, put in infrastructure, build expertise. But a comment that I have is it doesn't seem to drive a top-level mandate in terms of where that all goes and how you sustain it. And I think in industries like this, famine and feast are a very big problem for the supply chain. So you might get one contract and then what? And I think that just generally as a comment, I don't see that being addressed. And I would suggest that foreign primes will always have their native countries very strongly pulling the mandate. If we don't have an Australian prime or a version of, I think that the impact of this program might be lost. So some comments from my side.
I did have a follow-on question directly for you because it was related firstly to the SME aspects. So thank you very much for your comments. But we are seeing as well at the same time not 100% engagement by non-space SMEs. And I do actually wanted to ask you directly is what do you think could bring a lot of these SMEs to the table to partake in programs like this?
A market for one is the first thing. We are not a space SME, I will say that. We are an SME with expertise in engineering design and manufacturing on specialised products, but I see many other companies in Australia being capable of partaking if there's a market and if there's a need to partake in that industry. I think there's very many hurdles or barriers to entry, which I believe this program addresses in terms of building our capability, training and expertise, but there has to be a market, there has to be a pull, certainly. That's just my personal view, at least for what we've seen. We're pushing hard to try to bring that to the market, but there needs to be a pull as well, so to speak. Push-pull.
Yeah, we're trying for this side 100%. So please add your comments on Slido or add a written consultation, because we're really interested to hear what the SMEs are. So I won't take any further questions at the moment. We'll move to the demonstrator program, and then we can address this science question that comes along. Oh, yeah. Sorry, say again?
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions.
Oh, yes, that's true. There is, I did forget to mention this. On Slido, you'll notice there's a Q&A section. You'll notice that everyone else is putting their own questions down, and then you can like the questions. So I'll address the top 3 questions at the very end if you guys have, so we can sort of, find out the main questions that you guys are asking, so to make sure that we address it. So you can put your questions into Slido to see if you really, and so we can really identify those ones. Right, let's keep going. Demonstrator program. So you probably noticed it's going to get cooler and cooler as we go along, because we're getting more spacey as we come along here. So not saying supply chain isn't cool, but this is cooler. So this one here is the demonstrator program, and really the aim of this is not just to get your stuff into space, but predominantly we really want to see a lot of these products getting into space at the end of this. And we're proposing a competitive grant system. So this is sort of, and with a 2-round funding. And I'll explain this a little bit. So what we want to do is have the very first round as sort of a small amount of cash. Now, right now it's written that we have to have it as $500,000, but we are asking the question what value this should be. But the reason is we want to have a first round and really give it to quite a lot of companies. So we can say, look, these are something in the order of 30 companies, and we give them in the order of 50 to 100,000. And then sort of that dialogue starts happening. And then after about a year, we would then go for the bigger rounds. So we'd be looking for the $1 to $2 million grant that would come forward. And that's sort of the 2-round system that we're looking at. And the reason is because we found before is that people applied for the grant, between a very large amount. And a startup, for example, was coming along after 6 weeks of writing a grant and saying, I want $3 million. And then we're saying, look, we don't have the proof that you'll spend that properly, so we can't really do it. But the idea is fantastic. And we probably would have given them some money at a much smaller amount to really give them the proof of concept, but we can't give them anything. So we realised that feedback needs to happen between the agency and the grant, the people who are applying for the grants, to really give them that feedback and say, you know what, this is a really good idea, but we need this to change for you to really hit the mark. It also happens quite a bit where someone comes in and says they have a great idea, it's really done well, but then let's say they're missing all the testing that needs to be done for this to be properly fleshed out. And that testing costs an extra $1 million. Now actually we would have probably funded it, plus the $1 million extra, because the idea was amazing, but since the implementation wasn't good enough, we couldn't. It's not very easy to do that, because it would be irresponsible for us to give that sort of money out when we know the implementation plan isn't effective. So, and this is the reason why we want these sort of 2 rounds, is really to start with an initial, this is what we want to do, and really flesh it out. And then to give a bit of cash to sort of get that proposal into a really good position with some dialogue between us and you. And then the second round, as I said before, we're looking for around about 10 to 15 companies that we would fund and get the products into space. And I'll define exactly what I mean when I say get into space. Grants, right now how it's written, $500,000 to $10 million. I'll be honest, the 10 million probably won't be given to anyone. It'll be more in the order of 2 to 3, because we really want to get quite a lot of products up there. As I said, between 10 and 15 projects, we're hoping at the end goal, but the first round we want to make that net as large as possible. Total funding is 45 million, approximately. Expert panel, of course, to keep it fair and equitable, and then delivered through business.gov.au. The proposal time is October 2020. So we're really looking, it's a bit later, you have 6 months to really get those partnerships going, get those connections that we said before. November would be the time when the applications should be submitted by, and around about February, we're talking about the initial round of funding would be going. The first, the real level of cash can actually only come right now of how it's written is in 2022 July. So that's the larger sum. So at the moment we're looking for about 1.5 years would be these smaller amounts of cash to sort of really get these proposals going. What do I mean by eligible activity? What do I mean by getting into space? So this for me, a lot of it is really trying to get your products into space, but it also could be mean connecting something to something in space too. So you don't have to actually fly the product, but at least if you're doing something like a ground station, and I'll explain a bit further, then you should have that connection as one of the final activities that are going on. The other aspect that a lot of people misunderstood was that we're not just funding the flight, it's also the activities before that too. So if there's testing on the ground, would be included. Design work, this would be included too. But of course, one of the activities in the whole process would be a flight, is really to get up there. Supporting Moon to Mars activities, so it's, as I said, around those priorities that we set before and around those five groups, the in-situ resource utilization, next generation comms, space medicine, remote ops, and there's one other. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, but it's around those 5 that we would be obviously focusing our area. And also co-funding and in-kind contribution, we want that you'll be preferentialized the more you can bring to the table. So the biggest part here, and I think this is the key, is that we really want the university and institutions also to be partnered in this. I think there's a huge amount of experience inside the universities, there's a huge amount of experience inside the institutions such as CSIRO, and we really want to start that partnerships now. So, and this is something that obviously puts your program into a much better capability when you have those partnerships formed when you're applying for this. So going by yourself, I keep reiterating this, going by yourself, it makes it very hard. It makes it very hard. But of course, if you're a company that's amazing and you can do that, then please propose. But at the moment, partnerships is really the key. Right, so how would you get into space? The International Space Station is a great one. There's many options to go up there. There's also hosted payloads on a large launcher. This is a really good option as well. So to send you a small sort of CubeSat, 6 units, 12 units, 3 units, 1 unit onto one of these areas. But also as well on these smaller launches such as Rocket Labs. This is a great area that we're seeing. We are looking to put these on launches that have proven flight heritage. So we're not putting it on a startup launcher. When we fly, it should be a pretty good chance it's going to get there. The other one as well, so sort of the scenarios that I'm talking about here, technology transfer from an adjacent industry. Once again, we should really leverage what we have already, not reinvent the wheel. And a great one is the mining industry. Now I know we're not going to launch a rover, so don't use it as a great example. But let's say we have a rover in the mining industry that's been used constantly, and it's great. It's been used all the time. But the thing is, this thing is 200 kilos. It has a power system that's in the megawatts level, and it has data rates so you can actually play Netflix on it anytime you want. For the space industry, that doesn't work. You've really got to shrink this thing. You've really got to get the power down, and you've really got to get your data rates into something smart. And those activities I could see would be something that you'd do for a demonstrator program. But at the very end of all that, you should throw it into space and make it operate. So a rover, as I said, not a great example, but you can sort of see the sort of styles that we're talking about here. Another one is scenario 2, which is sort of like a business model proof of concept. And there's always a catch-22 in the space industry. One of the ones, and I think this is a really good example, is that there are businesses out there that want to look at thermal imagery of the Earth and to check the insulative capability of buildings. Yeah? But to prove that concept, you need infrared data. But you don't have access to infrared data until you launch something. So you can't get the money to launch something until you have the data, but you can't get the launch until you have the money. So it's a catch-22. So the point here is that this would be an area that we could discuss where you say, look, we need this launch, but then after this, we really see that there will be a business case that would be fleshed out after this. And then the last one, I'll go back here. The last one is next generation communications and ground stations. So, for example, let's say you have an amazing product for a ground station upgrade. If you put a proposal in and say, I just want to upgrade this ground station, and that's it, that for me wouldn't be a very strong proposal. But let's say you partnered with an international agency or an international organisation. They would fly the spacecraft, you would do the upgrade, and then the connection would happen at the end. Now that would be a strong proposal. So this sort of activities like this could be quite useful. The other area as well we were discussing, and we want to get your feedback on it, is also to do with image processing. So I know none of this would leave the Earth, but it would be if you're bringing in data, live stream data, or even satellite data in this sense, and you have a really amazing sort of image processing capability that you really see that is going to have an amazing business case at the end of it, then of course this could be something used. But the main thing here is that if we ended up with the 10 projects and they're all image processing projects, that wouldn't be ideal for us. So we'd want to get a lot of these products into space, but at the same time, if you do have a great application for exactly this, that has a great business model, then this would be a fantastic way to do it. Now, a few common questions that come out at this point is that why are we focusing so much commercially on this? And the reason is this, especially because it says Moon to Mars. And the reason is because we want to create that first step, that first commercial step where we can really take another step from to go to Moon to Mars. So we realise getting stuff to Moon and to Mars is quite difficult. So to have this sort of test cases and to have these a good foundation to base from is to have a company that has a really great financial capability through a commercial aspect. And so a good example, if you wanted to buy a car, would you guys buy a car from a startup company, or would you buy a car from Toyota? Yes? Now let's say I wanted to send that car to the Moon. Who would you prefer to buy the car from still? The startup or Toyota? So it's quite clear that someone that has that sort of fleshed out, great the business model that's already functioning, it makes it very useful. And another good example is the IoT companies that are developing now. You have a much stronger bid if you've said, you know what, we're doing IoT around Australia right now. We have all these satellites up here. We just want to put one on the Moon as well. It's much stronger to come from that foundation than it is to come from a direct startup that says, I've got nothing behind me, but I think this is a great idea. And so hence we want to create that sort of commercial foundation that you can take the next step from. I did probably mention this, and we'll get to the question. We have Slido and then questions. There is a commercial focus on this, as you probably have noticed. It's very much there should be a business case. It's not tech development for tech development's sake. Okay, and a really good example was when Planet Labs set up. Their first satellite was an iPhone. They actually developed no new technology. They launched an iPhone, and actually the rocket blew up. It was a sounding rocket. And then the only reason why they got funding for the next level was because the only thing that survived the launch was the iPhone. So you can see that it doesn't have to always be tech development to really prove this business case. And sometimes it's easier to go for the minimal viable product and not be a tech development. But it's up to you guys, what you guys see. But of course, if you partner with a university and leverage the technology they already have, then this is even better. So, right, I hope I haven't confused you on this one, but we do have question time, so we'll be able to go into this. So the very first one, and this is all in Slido again. So this is the largest amount of question sets you'll get. I have one more Slido session after this, which is actually a lot smaller. It's only 2 questions. But the biggest, I've mentioned a few projects that that the team here have seen as good examples that should be funded by the demonstrator program. We just want to understand what you would see as great projects. Now, we're not releasing this to the public, so please put what you think down. But we really want to understand, what sort of partnerships that you would be forming. You can be quite general, and to see, I would like this sort of thing funded under the demonstrator program. If you don't give the examples, it's very hard for us to design a project around that. So you could, for example, you'd say, look, some people say I want a science mission funded, but then we would have the bus built in Australia, which would have a business case behind it for building up heritage of Australian capability. Oh, sorry, go.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a point there. The consultation hub where you can put your written submissions in does have the option for a confidential submission. So if there is something that you do want to share with us that we need to know about, you can indicate that it can be confidential, and we will treat that as for official use only under the Australian privacy principles and so on. So just wanted to make that clear, just to
it's very
put a fine point on what you said.
No, thank you. So it's very good to get those examples. I'll take questions at the very end, sorry.
This is just to frame this effectively. So you've actually spoken about getting to the moon or getting to Mars. That's been the focus. What about being there? So this, I guess, where cropping and farming and stuff comes in. That as part of the demonstrator as well?
We'll get to this at the very end. The question I'm asking here, what would you like this to be? So this is a perfect answer. You say, I would like it to be agriculture and building habitations on the moon. This is sort of stuff. So I did say before, most of this stuff, as you could see, wasn't going to the moon. And when I say most, I mean all. We were aiming, getting to the moon is a big step. I think if we just do this in the first one, it's going to be very difficult. So we really want to start building up capability to get to LEO first. And then, of course, we can move beyond this as well. But I think moon in the very first step, we're just going to have a lot of fried electronics. So that's my personal opinion. But if you guys say, no, I want everything to go to the moon first time round, we want to hear this. Right, the next one, it's to do with this 2-round process. We really want to see your feedback on this as well. So does this 2-round process work for you? Look, if you propose something else completely, just say, no, I would like to see this process instead. But does this work better than what we had before? So that's really the question we have here. And then the second part of this question is, what is the minimum amount you'd expect for this first bit of cash? What's sort of enough to get your skin in the game? What would you say would be the minimum amount that you would need to do this? And that's really to get a fully fledged proposal out and also to do a sort of a phase A on your mission, this sort of stuff. What would you need? So just remember, the smaller it is, the more companies we can fund. So there's a certain amount of cash. The smaller that is, the more we can fund. And that means the more we can start with that big funneling process.
I came in late, but what is the funding?
So right now we have, basically in the first 2 years, we have 4 million. A bit less. So, but if at the moment it's written that we have to, minimum is $500,000 spent, which means that you'd only be able to get 8 companies funded under that process, which is not desirable. So we would like to drop it to we'd like to drop it lower. I don't want to tell you which value, but we'd like to drop it to a lower level so we can get that 30 companies funded in that first section. No worries. Just, I know you came in late, but there's Wi-Fi and it's under slido.com that you can answer all these questions from here. So this next question is a little bit from the slides we had before, which is those 5 areas that we discussed. So what niche areas do we see that you could consider to grow its space capability? So is there any other area? So we mentioned in-situ resource utilization, remote ops, space medicine, next generation comms, digital celestial body. Well, there was a digital mapping of celestial bodies. Is there any other areas that you really see sort of that we could move into as well for the demonstrator project that we can get some missions out of? So the last 2 questions, a bit more on the programmatic side, and this is a little bit related to, the first one's really reviews. So typically from what I've seen overseas is that during a project you would have reviews by subject matter experts and they would be giving you recommendations. The difference is in the industries I had before was that they were recommendations, but they ended up as a you must do. And then your cost structure blew out. So we would be proposing here that we would get subject matter experts in to review your projects, to give you recommendations, but it would be your choice to implement it or not, because you're the one that has to manage the budget. So, but would those recommendations, from a technical, from a programmatic or commercial aspects, would these recommendations help? We would obviously discuss when these reviews would happen, so it would not be, but we just want to understand, would you prefer to have this? Would you like these subject matter experts to come in? Now, just so you know what sort of subject matter experts we're talking about, if you guys come back with yes, it gives us a strong indication here, and that means we would probably start talking to international agencies and start bringing some of these individuals to start reviewing the projects we have here, but also leveraging the individuals we have in Australia as well. So we would be trying to get these projects reviewed and give the recommendations to the projects as they go through the different milestones. So would you like this? And if you do, technical, programmatic, commercial, all three, just one, which is the most important for you? Perfect example, if you have an optical sensor, then inside of your business model, but you don't have access to optical experts, then we would try and get an optical expert in to review your product. Make it more redundant, make it more space rated.
Does that make sense though? If you're an optical company proposing an awesome optical sensor, surely you've got the expertise.
So I'll give a good example. But I won't give the name of the company, but there is a company that's obviously building a spacecraft at the moment, and someone told them to put an optical payload in there, which requires a significantly higher pointing level than what they're used to, which means they need a full overhaul of the AOCS system. So they basically need the spacecraft pointing in a highly accurate manner. They themselves physically could not afford to have that expert around. They're at least $200,000 a year, and they're a startup. So it's not, I think they would like to have them, but also some of these people just don't exist in Australia yet. But overseas they do have, like at NASA, they have at least hundreds of these people lying around, but also in other agencies too. So it's just more access to these individuals. But it's up to them. If you say, no, I don't want this, then you don't have to have it. It's just wondering, first, to do this, we have to sow the seeds now. To make it happen. So if you say, no, we don't want it, then we won't sow the seeds and we'll focus on something else. But if you say, yes, we do, then we can start that process. But in the future, the answer is going to be yes. They will have the expert in there because they would have got a few spacecraft up there. Okay, so then the last one, access to space. And this is sort of a bit of a verification of what we're thinking with this program. Do you see access to space as an exceptionally important aspect of this program? So really getting your stuff in space. And I have specifically asked you in there, what would you like the agency to do in relation to this? So there is a few options that we have, and I've asked you questions specifically. But the first option is that the agency can buy slots. Obviously, then you can't have any other options around that. You must go in those slots. We can buy it and then gift them off to the grantees or give it in some way to the grantees, or vice versa. Would you guys prefer to negotiate and then be the finance being done through the grant? Or is there any other mechanisms that you guys would like? This is a really important question for us. So what would you prefer? Fantastic. I see some looking up now. So this will stay open for a bit longer. I'll try and give the indication when it gets close so you can press save. So I can bring the questions to the forum now. I'll leave them up here. So is there any questions about the demonstrator program? Any aspect here? I will come back to, do you want to ask your question again? Maybe it's the...
Oh, I was just wondering if it requires a 50% match.
50, you mean the funding in Australia, do you mean? Or? So the question was related to, do we need to have a 50% mandate for for money to stay in Australia. So this question has come up a lot.
I think it's a match funding.
Oh, the match funding. So, okay, my apologies. So this one, it was based on the merit criteria. So the more you bring to the game, the better you'll be in the proposal aspect, but we haven't said expected match funding here. So, of course, if you come along and say, you know what, we're leveraging all of this, plus our investors are also providing, plus this, then your proposal is going to be in a much better situation than everyone else's. And I will say, to set the expectations, if you come in and expect the agency to pay for everything, then it will be a bit tougher to fund. We would at least, as a minimum, expect you to partner up with a university or an institution to try and bring in the technology is something that we have already. So we're starting from the ground up again. It makes it very hard. But I'm not saying it's off the chart. It's just it is easier from this side. So we haven't put a match funding expected here. Yes, I think the microphone is, where is it at the moment? Do you have it, Sue, or is it under Joe?
Okay, so you can repeat the question.
Okay.
In this first round of offers, all the funding's in the out years. There's almost nothing in the next 2 years in most of those programs. We propose multi-year programs where, in effect, small Australian companies are extending finance to the Commonwealth to really all the revenues.
How am I going to repeat this one?
Initially, and expecting venture capitalists, whatever, to actually fund the Australian government's liabilities. Can we propose a 3-year program where most of the value is, most of your contribution shifts to the out years, and most of our contributions in the early years?
Okay, so you're saying that we would like to understand is that you'd like to propose projects where you do a lot of the work early, but you get funded in the later years.
Yes.
That's a good question. Would you like to answer that one, Adam?
In this case, it's a really good question. In this case, the funding profile has been agreed by government, and that's the rate at which we get the money, and we can pass it out. So, in that context, you can see that we've got less money up front, and that's why we're sort of funding the demonstrator projects. We'll be investing in the supply chain and those sort of development activities. But the major investments that we'll make, either in the demonstrator programs or the Trailblazer, the main program, is in the out years.
Money for, say, 3 years in this round?
Do you mean 3 years?
So if we're proposing a 3-year program, does that actually get signed up to by the agency?
I see what you're saying. Tell us what you think it should be. We've got, how the grant contracts are written. That'll all be put out in the grant opportunity guidelines when they do come out. But if there's a particular period of performance that you'd like to see across a grant program, let us know what you think would be right. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any other questions? Yes, to the gentleman here. Just there's a microphone just coming to you. It's a bit easier than me repeating it.
Thank you. How does the investment of $4 million compare with other countries who are actually, trying to develop their industry's capacity? It seems very modest.
4 million, or you said 4 million?
4 million, wasn't that the funding amount for this?
So you mean the grant amount or the amount? So the whole fund is 45 million.
Right.
But you're talking about the grant, the specific grant amount.
How does that
So
compare, for example, with...
What would you, I guess the question is, what would you like the funding to be?
Answering a question with a question is always interesting, but...
So I can tell you what I think, but the best option is...
interested in knowing what you think.
I do want to... if I tell you what I think, then we're just... I'm justifying my position, which isn't great. The best way is if you tell us what would you like the funding level to be for the grant. That's the thing. So we know we have 45 million. We have a value, and it's between $500,000 and 10 million. What would you expect as a typical grant for the projects that you're doing? So that's the question. We do want you to try and bring as much as you can from investors, but what would you need? Is 1 million enough? Do you need 5 million? Can you this is the, we can bring this to the audience as well.
So my question was, and if you can't answer it, that's okay too. Yeah. Do you know where we fit relative to other countries who are investing in these initiatives? So, for example, China's building a base on the moon. That it just seems very modest for me. And I'm not a space guy, but I used to be a government guy and understand how you fund things. It seems like you're trying to do two different things. You're trying to be risk averse and get biggest bang for a very modest buck, and yet this is a very ambitious activity.
So, okay, I'll answer some of it, but I still I would love that question to be answered because it's very important about exactly the grant amount that you would be expecting. The For this specifically, personally, the values are not actually that bad. So if you go to some of the NASA programs they have, specifically when it's commercially orientated, they were even told it was less than what we proposed. They said 2 million, you don't need to give a startup 2 million, you can go into the much lower levels than this. So we are jumping back and forward to find exactly the right value, but we also did talk to some of the manufacturers to understand what would actually a spacecraft development cost, what would a payload cost be, and we are talking in the 1 to 2 to 3 kilo range, so we're not talking about this 20, 30 kilos. And reasonably, you can get something decent out and up in space for a good couple of million if you want this. So, but the launch cost, but it depends how small you go. Most agencies are funding in the order of 20 to 30 kilo blocks, and that's when your costs start mounting quite heavily because the engineering becomes also very complicated, but at the same time, it's also the cost of launch.
So what's that cost
For the bigger ones, I don't have that off the top of my head. So, I mean, even the launch, I don't have it off the top of my head, I won't guess, but I can come back to you.
So the Capstone's $40 million satellite, $10 million launch from Rocket Labs.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Capstone, which was announced a couple of days ago, it's going to assist lunar orbit of the moon. It's a $40 million satellite and $10 million launch with Rocket Labs.
Yeah, so just how you can really get the costs down the bigger you buy. So if you decided to buy in the order of a large full rocket, 3 tons, you can get this down to $10,000 a kilo or even less. But if you decided to buy 1 kilo, it's in the order of 100 to 150,000 per kilo. So that's also the question why we asked the last one is that would you prefer us to buy it because we can buy more in bulk? Yeah, so you can, but it depends. So we would put out tenders, if we did do this, we'd put out tenders to the people on the International Space Station and say, with 5 million, 10 million and 15 million, what can you offer us? And then we'd start the negotiations. And we would like flights in 2, 3, 4, 5. The other thing we have to also limit is that we do not want to put all Australian products on one craft because then we'll have it all blown up in one go. And then people ask, what happened to the 45 million that we had? So we do need to mitigate this risk as well. But we're looking for small payloads, that sort of level. So I'm really not trying to answer it, but that's, if you're looking for that data, that's fine. But what size grant level would you guys like? I still would like to understand this. What grant size would you prefer for the demonstrator projects? Anyone have a? Yes, there is limitations, of course, but what do you think is a reasonable level?
James Stevenson from KPMG's Engineering and Asset Management team. What I haven't seen yet about any of this initiative is what we're actually going to be doing as a project. When we say moon to Mars, what does that mean? Are we going to build a railgun on the moon and then send astronauts to Mars from there? That's not going to be a 1 kilo exercise. So do we have any more insight as to what it is that we're going to be chasing for projects to achieve this?
It's a very common question that's been popping up. I probably will hold your question until the Trailblazer one because that's sort of a bit more of the visionary piece that's coming in here. But the exact mission, we don't have it yet. We're still in negotiations on
Sure. That makes it very hard to have a guess at what size a grant should be.
So for me, we have to achieve this very quickly. We're talking about getting stuff up in year 3, 4 and 5. So we have to deal with hardware that's relatively close to near done. I mean, it doesn't have to be built now. So we're talking about stuff that's already lying around, designs that are already there. Yeah, well understood. So for me, that's the case. This should be in most people's heads approximately what they have in their backyard, really. When I say backyard, I mean university, institution. But it should be something that you've already there. But also as well, we are talking about startups too. This is a place that startups can partake, but it should be really just getting that out. And they should be leveraging other companies that have already done stuff before to really get their first model out too. So yes, I understand it's from this side, but it's sort of a combination of both. We're taking what we have today, but at the same time, we'll be trying to pull it into a vision that we're moving there. But I don't have the direct answer yet for you, so.
There may be a chance to focus on some support systems like GPS for lunar activities, that sort of thing. That'll be an enabler for further work.
Actually, someone brought that up in the Melbourne one as well, which is a really good one. So thank you very much. But we do have the Trailblazer, so I'll hold that question until the next one. You'll see it will come up for here.
Okay,
is there any other questions? There's a question over here from the gentleman. Fantastic.
Peter Kerr from SmartSat CRC.
It kind of links to the last question, which is, I guess, where this is going and what you're targeting within the NASA program. Having done a bit of reading on this in the last couple of days, so I'm an expert, phase one of Artemis finishes 2024, and there are decision points that are made in the next couple of years for that. So a lot of the technology going into phase one is already locked down. So really, we should be focusing on phase two, which is 2024 to 2028. But that's not coming out clearly in terms of, you know, what's the demonstrator program, what's the Trailblazer program, how do we actually link research and development in Australia to this broader mission? Are we looking at short term, which is what you just said, or are we looking longer term, therefore taking a bit more risk with missions that might actually contribute to phase two of the Artemis program?
So I'm always trying to find a way how I don't answer it and allow you to give the answer, mainly because it's the program we want to get as much information from you. So but I will say this is that it is exceptionally important for us to start getting these quick wins. The reason is because we have been given relatively quite a lot of money for a very new venture from the government, and we need to show some wins. And so this specifically is about trying to get those wins as well as the supply chain. For the Trailblazer, which we'll talk about in the next step, that's a little bit more the longer term visionary aspect. But this here, we really need some runs on the board now. And how to get those runs, it's some of the best way is really just to get those products into space and get businesses coming out of it. So this is a fantastic way. So that's it hopefully answers your question in this, but I guess the question is, would you like to see this more long-term visionary aspect, knowing the limitations that we have with government at the moment? So we've been given 150 million, and they are really wanting us to prove what they can do with that 150.
So my answer is it should be long-term, and it should be about impact, and I think we'll have limited chance of impact. So I guess my answer would be it should be long-term and about impact, and I think we've got limited chance of impact if you're looking at the phase one of Artemis. So I get your point about government's expectations. You know, in your first section, you talked about the agency's role in communicating with government. That should be your message, which is this is a long-term proposition, developing industry and having impact as a small nation in a much larger program. To be the focus should be long-term, high risk, and phase two.
Okay, fantastic. That's a really good comment. No, it's a really good comment. I'll leave it at that. That's fantastic. But I did have an aspect on the visionary. So this part does come up quite regularly. I do have an aspect. The vision and focus is the question that pops up very common, is that how much focus and vision do you want? Would you like a complete single goal that we are going to aim towards, that really is that this is what's going to define Australia? Or do you want it a bit more, just allow us to do what we need to do as a business? And we sort of said it's loosely around these themes. What would you guys prefer? This is a really good, I think from my side, it links quite well to what you're asking here. So really focus, only fund specific industries, or would you just like a little bit more open and allow you to fund what you need? Is that?
Yeah, I'm not going
Okay.
to answer. Anna Moore from the ANU Institute for Space. So just kind of following on a little bit from what Peter started. I do think it's really important that as a nation we show the return from this 150 million. It's critical for the long-term goal, which is that we want several hundred million per year invested in the space industry, basically. And if we're not all together on that, we might as well all go home. So that's the long-term goal for me. Tell me if I'm wrong, but that's why I'm here. So my question really was, I mean, this is exciting for the techie side of things, but there hasn't been much sort of discussion on the innovative ways that we can grow the industry. How do we really show that it's a no-brainer by investing, 300 million or whatever the ERG said, that's going to be returned, for the nation and long term. And so, for example, sorry to talk about something on the mountain, but we had test facilities at ANU that no one was using 3 years ago, at all. And they were $30 million, but no one was using them. And we went out and we talked to industry and said why, and they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford even $2,000 because they were all, this is before the agency, and they just didn't have access to $2,000 to come and use those facilities, but they really wanted to, and they wanted to learn how to use them. And so what we did is we went out and we had 4 great partners, which was the New Zealand Space Agency, of all things, UNSW Canberra, the ACT state government and DST, as well as ANU. And it was only a tiny bit of money for those institutions, 100K a year, coming together, opening up just for 2 years. We can't do it long term, but for 2 years, and now we've gone up, you know, a few 100% in the use of the facilities, and it's kind of hard scheduling people in. And a lot of it's industry now coming in. So I guess I'm just saying, are there innovative solutions here that can really change what it's like to be a startup and industry and tech transfer and everything that applies to everyone? Companies outside of space and in space, that kind of accelerates this story for you, rather than just concentrating on companies that which are great, by the way, which are really great, but just talking about the tech in one area. I think we need to talk about something a bit more innovative, not just in the tech and the science, it's across the whole board.
So what would you like to see? That's my question. I know you're expecting me to work. I've been doing this all week, so I'm expecting you guys to work. What would you like to see? What innovative solutions would you guys like to see come here to
okay, you
inspire
mentioned
this?
the primes.
I'm sorry. Also, it's a really, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I will say that the ANU test facility, it is fantastic. A lot of the people are using this, and it is fantastic to see. So I would like to say thank you for this as well. So it's a really good innovative solution to this, what we have today. So continue on.
Well, there are many people here who have great ideas here, but I think, I mean, you mentioned a bit about the primes earlier on. I mean, you asked a question of what do they want. I mean, they want defence contracts. So work with the government, sorry to sound so black and white about it, but that's what it is. And so you're a government organisation, work with defence, you know, to make sure that in return they're able to accelerate, and they have to do it, okay? They have to accelerate our industry reach to international supply chains and things like that. So just finding quick ways that it's not that much of a, it's not that hard to do really. It's using your assets as quickly as you can over a short amount of time to accelerate everyone in industry, not just a few companies. That's not going to cut it for you. You know, the agency needs to show that growth. That's your number one KPI. We all have to support you on that. So I think you have to help everyone.
So just before I'll hand this to Adam, because I know that he has the inner workings of the government a bit better behind the scenes, but the only part I would say on this is that the agency that we have set up, we are trying as hard not to be the focal point of everything. A lot of agencies around the world have always made sure that all funding goes through them, everything goes to them. Our agency won't be doing this. We want exactly the other groups to come to the table as well. And so this part is, I would to follow on with this, is that I know that people say we want the agency to come to us and do this, but what I put it back out to you, why don't you, who are running these programs, come to us and say, this is how we can help you? And I think this is also a big part too, is it is a relationship we're building with all the government industries. But I know that there are great programs inside the industry, which we are, inside the government, that we are trying to leverage and talk to. But at the same time, I would really ask, you know, look, this is what we can do for you. This is what we want to move into the space industry as well, and we think we can turn our program into this that helps the space industry. So don't always look at us is the key part. We will obviously try and help as much as we can, but you don't need permission to do it. You can always just start on your own. But I will pass this to Adam to follow on with the question, because we are doing activities like this. I just don't know if people know about it. So I'll pass it to you at the moment.
Yeah, look, it's a great question, Anna. I think you know, definitely acknowledging that pardon me, the agency has a role as the sort of the civil agency. So certainly our friends at Defence and certainly through the defence initiatives that are underway, such as the Centre for Defence Industry Capability, they're definitely fostering that direct relationship there. But we do acknowledge that there's a very strong overlap between how Australia's civil space businesses support the defence domain as well. So we are working very closely with our colleagues in defence, and through, we've got a coordination body called the Space Coordination Committee that we get together with the other Commonwealth agencies and hopefully bring together all of our initiatives to grow industry. But I think it's absolutely a fair comment, and sort of part of our engagement today is to make sure that we are connecting with industry and we're getting those ideas, and we're sort of bringing forward you know, innovative initiatives that we can use to deliver the outcomes, particularly for this program. Not sure if that's a really a fulsome answer, but I hope that that's some information.
But I will follow on with this, that I'll tell you from very soon, but I will follow on this. If you are from an organisation and you said, I see that we can make our program or institution more space orientated, just come to us. You don't have to wait for an invitation. just come to us. We are all ears because we really want you guys to work towards this as possible. So you have the microphone. Fantastic,
Yes.
Sarah.
So on that, I was going to say that many of you in the room will know that CSIRO has an R&D program in space, and we have, for this round of R&D work that we're doing, explicitly aligned it with the Moon to Mars initiative that the Space Agency is doing. So we're hoping to, hop on board and help where we can. But the other thing I wanted to do was to reinforce Anna's point earlier about how little funding some of the small companies have available. Yeah, I mean, we've done a few sort of collaborative activities with small funding, and even when you give them, co-funding, and even if you ask them to contribute very small amounts of money, it's just not there in many cases. So I was a bit concerned in your capability development in the previous one, and maybe in this as well, about the emphasis on co-funding. Yeah, and I would be inclined to perhaps give an explicit exclusion from that for companies below a certain size.
Okay, it's a really good suggestion. So we have had that comment a few times now, so this is not the first time. They definitely said that the cash for small companies are not there, and it really rules out a lot of the smaller ones if you do it. But it's a really good example. Thank you. So I'll only take one more on this, and then we have to keep moving from here. And please, Tony, go straight to the point, please.
Okay. Why aren't we seeing, in terms of a partner, the actual, because there's two industries in Australia who realistically are quite desperate for support, and that's the tourism industry and the ag industry. Now, they've both been independently valued, and they combine up to about $200 billion a year to the Australian economy and employ 850,000 people. We've just, as a nation, spent $6 billion patching up what they live off, which is the land we call Australia and the ocean we call Australia. So there's actually, when we talk about buyers and we talk about a goal, there is actually a buyer of space services. It's called the Australian people. Because if we as a nation have to keep spending $6 billion a year, forget space, forget education, forget everything. We can't afford it. Like basically if you went to the Navy today, you'd say, sorry boys, you just lost 2 submarines. So that my question is to the Space Agency, and I've asked this question almost since the beginning of the Space Agency, why isn't the Earth observation the number one goal? Because if you look at, say, what Apollo did for America, and I did my degree in America. Hang on a sec. What Apollo did was that, yes, here is the goal, men on the moon, get them back. But what it did was that off that program, extraordinary amounts of technology got dragged along or fell off the side of it. If we put Earth observation sciences as the prime focus, all the other stuff will come off it. All the other stuff will benefit from it. Because if you go back to what Apollo did, like the reason we've got mobile phones
now... So the question is related to you would like the demonstrator program to be focused on Earth observation. Is this how I understand?
Not 100%, but certainly that as the number one goal, because we've got a customer.
No, I've heard your comment. Thank you very much, Tony.
So why isn't it the number one goal?
No, the question is, I think the proposal that you've stated, you said you would like Earth observation to be the number one. I'll note this down. And would anyone else like the Earth observation also to be a major part of this program for the demonstrators? Put it on the side.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. All right. It's a really good comment to bring out. It's on the Earth observation side as well. So I'll put this down as well for the Earth observation. Tony, I'd ask you to. You also had your time in the last consultation as well. I'd give it to the others as well, please. Would anyone else? We'll take one more question, and then we'll start moving to the Trailblazer, which is the very next.
Hi, Arvind from University of Canberra.
Yep.
So I heard you several times mentioning about having an established business and having systems that are already present to have an edge during this program grants. How are the universities and small startups in Australia? How are we going to make sure that they get the grants instead of international companies setting up shop in Australia? Because they would have technology that's already existing. They would have platform that existed, and they would have technologies and buses that would flown like tens of missions.
So you're saying, how do we make sure that the money doesn't leave Australia, too much of it?
That's right.
So the first part I'll answer to this, because it's a really tricky question. The reason is because last time on some of the programs, they said 80% must stay in Australia, but that means you can't launch. So that means it's nearly impossible unless you go with a startup launcher in Australia. So then I will put the question back on that. How much, would you like a specific amount of funding to stay in Australia, or would you prefer an option where you say, you know what, excluding launch, this certain amount should stay in Australia as well? What mechanism would you prefer to keep the money in Australia?
No, my question was like, how do we differentiate between technology that has been proven already in the world versus technology that we are developing in-house in Australia?
That's a good question. Do you have any on this? Yeah, if you.
Sorry, it was Owen. Owen. Look, thanks. It's a really good question. One of the overarching objectives of this, and it was very much in the PM's announcement, was that the investment would be for the benefit of Australian businesses and researchers. So the general requirement for grant applications, and we'll run this through our partners in Oz Industry, most likely, that Australian businesses, that yes, they have to be registered as an Australian business, but certainly we'd be looking as a part of the merit criteria for them to demonstrate as a part of their application how they will use the funds. And certainly one of the things will reflect that overarching ambition to say that the funds should be spent in Australia for the benefit of Australian businesses and researchers. So when the people that are assessing the grant look at that, if a business says, I'm just going to spend this money overseas, that's unlikely to be meritorious. So I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
I have a little follow-up question on that. So one of the biggest expense that we have as an engineering team building things is manufacturing.
Of course.
So how are we making sure that, because if we put the manufacturing cost towards the grant cost, it's going to be probably 50% of the cost. Then our merit criteria goes down because we are manufacturing elsewhere. Because manufacturing in-house and sometimes is more expensive than manufacturing overseas. So are there going to be, we are seeing this as a national pride, right? So when we talked about Canada doing the Canada Arm, the whole industry came together. Subsidies were announced for manufacturing in Australia, and subsidies were announced for testing in Australia. So is the industry looking to do something like that so that manufacturing costs come down?
It's a great question. And, obviously if you've got experience looking at the Canada Arm, how do you think that should work for us here? So what would you like to see, or what would help you manufacture elements or components in Australia? That's the purpose of this consultation. Tell us. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I'll probably hold further questions because we have the Trailblazer. It's really only one slide, or two slides, I should say. And then we will go back to questions again, but it's a lot shorter. So this is the end run now. So we're nearly there. Thank you very much for your time and patience. So the Trailblazer program. Now this is the part, I think, as I said, it's getting cooler and cooler as we go along. And this is the really fun part. So we're really looking at this sort of flagship program that's going to partake a part of a major international exploration mission, and hence the Moon to Mars aspect. So this is really where we're partnering with NASA. That is a clear aspect, and we are in negotiations with NASA where it would be and what we would do. We don't actually have the specific mission, but we are looking for one mission. Now that doesn't mean we're going to have one spacecraft, but one mission is what we're looking for. So really one visionary aspect. And we wanted to come to you and have a little bit of a chat about what that mission can be. So we have themes that we're going under, and we really would like to understand a bit more about what missions you would see that we could, as Australia, achieve in the time frame that we're talking about. So something that would have capability, something that would actually inspire the public, but at the same time that would fit also into NASA's programs of to date. So this is sort of what we're looking for. We are going back to consultation on this, so we'll have a more definitive answer basically in October 2020 on where NASA is sort of lining itself and what we can do, and then we'll go back to public consultation on exactly what project we could do and see what sort of partners we can bring to the table. But the funding for this actually doesn't start until 2022, so it's actually a bit late in the program, we know it. And also as well, we are trying to use the demonstrator and also the supply chain to feed into this at least with information. So at least sort of seeing the proposals that we're getting as a key aspect to moving into feeding into how we can actually do this program. The other part is it's 50 million. So before, I know your questions are already in your head now. 50 million, that's not enough. We do understand this, but at the moment it gets us to the table. So to start the conversations with NASA, we really sort of need that money. We obviously are trying to look to see what we can do to increase this. That's clearly there, but right now I can't guarantee anything. The only thing we can guarantee is that 50 million's on the table right now. So, but of course, it doesn't stop us proposing ones that are larger. That doesn't mean that's off the table, and we would be expecting to go back and say, you know what, for 50 million you can get this, but for 100 million we can do this, but for this much million we could do this. The other part, we're also very, I would say it's also a tricky balance that we have to do, is that we know that if we put this much money into one company, then we are going to create this company that's going to sort of swallow the rest of them. So we do have to try and find a mechanism where the agency doesn't lead it. So we're not a NASA, we're not going to be allocating work packages to companies, it's not going to happen. But exactly how this mechanism is tricky. So how does an agency fund something without actually really running the show and without creating a company that's so big that we have to keep feeding it later as well? So it's a really tricky balance that we have to form. But there'll be more details on this for next year. But the key aspect is this, and it's sort of about the areas that we want to leverage. And the missions that we're talking to NASA on are around items like this. So we're talking about in situ resource utilization. So they're very interested to see what our mining industry can bring to the table. And that's also under remote operations as well. So this is something that they are very keen to see what we can do. Also a component on a lunar probe or a vehicle. This is something else that we are in negotiations with right now. And the other side is next generation communication. So this is sort of the areas that we are in negotiation about. And then we will obviously try and start nutting out specific missions that we can be a part of. But it does depend on what NASA's doing. It depends on what we're capable of doing. So it's a really important aspect to sort of do. So we really want your feedback on this to say, the first thing is, what projects do you envisage under this? Now, you've got 30 seconds to get out a full $50 million project, so ready. But you have some more time, and also there is a written consultation, so please, if you think of something else that comes through and says, you know what, we think this would be the greatest mission for our country, this will inspire the public, we could fund it through these mechanisms. We really want to hear your feedback on this. And the other area is, are there any other themes? Are there any other themes that we've got back here? Is there anything else that we're really missing? So that we can come to the table and say, you know what, we've got this great experience in this area, and we will start negotiating with NASA around what we could do fitting into their programs, while making sure that we can actually leverage capability that we have today. So we really want to understand what projects would you see, and is there any other areas that we could really leverage? So I'll let you write this all down, and then we'll go back to question time, and then we're pretty much finished after that. So I'll give you a few minutes. I think I should put some elevator music on when this is going on next time. So I'll give you another minute, and then we can probably get to the question time. Okay, so more people are looking up. I just have one more slide I will state, just because I find it's easier to say this slide, and then we go to comments and questions, and then we finally finish. It's a bit easier. So this is a bit what to do now. So very next step, we'll go into question time, but really we want you to put your written submissions in. Please do this too. Of course, we're taking Slido. This is immediate, which is fantastic. But also as well, start your teaming. You really need to start those partnerships now, finding those industrial partners, finding the universities to work with, finding the investors. So this has to be done, really start now. It takes a long time to build those teams up and those relationships. Just remember, in July, supply chain grants, this should be open at this time to apply. And then in October for the demonstrator program, it should be in around about October that we can start opening this. Okay, so what I like to do here is to have a little bit of basically some questions around the Trailblazer, and then after a while we just go into any questions. So hopefully the first two would be at least on the Trailblazer program, and then after this we'll go into any questions you want. I do realise it is 12 o'clock now. We said for 1, so we will finish earlier, which is fantastic. But I'll hopefully make this no more than 15 minutes, and then we can sort of bring it to a close. So any questions on the Trailblazer program? Any comments, any proposals, I should say? Any proposals for the Trailblazer program?
The duration of the $50 million? Sorry, can you just tell us the duration of the $50 million? How many years is that expected to be spent over?
So it goes to 2025. Correct me, 2025.
Yeah, so we've got 5 years.
So, no, starts in 2022 and it goes to 2025. So it's 3 years of funding for this, which is why we need to discuss what we do after this as well.
So for most companies, that would be quite a lot of money to ramp up from and spend constructively over that sort of period of time. Do you expect that other aspects that the Space Agency will support before that will lead into this?
I guess the question is, it is a concern. We looked at this, and to get that sort of cash to go into one place is to build the personnel up is difficult. I guess the question is more for you. What would you like to see as a ramping procedure? Because it doesn't have to go to one company, and that's actually something we would like to discuss. I think building into one company might be difficult anyway. So what would you like to see to help with this ramping procedure? Would you like it to go into multiple companies? Would you like funding to be done earlier? What would be the best mechanism you'd see?
So just off the top of my head, I think it's something where you demonstrate you can spend $1 million before that you start spending $15 million a year. Or something like this. Maybe you guys have already sort of mentioned that there could be a 2-stage approach for your other program. That could also help in this case.
And the mechanism on finding, so the way that we saw how we could find a project was we weren't going to just start with one and just go ahead with it. We were hoping to have a few and then fund them for a little bit to sort of get that phase A out. Phase A, phase B1, and then move out from there. So we would be hoping to end up with 3 programs, and that's to do with mitigating of risks, because teams can fall apart. But at the same time, we might just find out that NASA says, you know what, that's not going to get funded, and then when are we going to be with that? So we would see that we'd have to fund a few at the very beginning, and then we'd move into, but at a certain point, to make sure our money doesn't get destroyed, we're going to have to choose one at that point. So in a normal program, they'd keep it down to 2 until around about phase B2 at least. For us, I think we're going to have to decide pretty quickly what we're going to do, but we need the right information, and that's mission profiles that are already set, cost structures that have been brought out, who's the teaming. We're going to need that information. That takes time and money to generate that info. So that's how I do see it coming out. Yes?
Nicholas Carniger, formerly Research School of Chemistry, currently Gilmore Space Technologies. Conspicuously absent from this discussion, to me, has been sovereign launch. And it's difficult to imagine a more nationally inspiring or STEM education knock-on effect program than Indigenous launch, sovereign launch. Would you care to comment?
No. So the launch question has come up. It is a very common one. So the official answer is that if you can achieve something within the 5-year period, we don't see what the aspect is, but we know that it's not very much geared up for launch. That's quite clear from how the program design is setting up. And I guess more the question is for the public is how much of a launch priority would you like to be put on this program? Knowing that launches do take a lot of money to get off the ground, the question is would you like this program to be geared up to generate a sovereign launch capability? And just remember that means it will be at least about a quarter of the money disappearing to a launch supplier. So what would you guys prefer? Is there any comments relating to building a national launch provider under this program? Yes, at the back there. Do you have the? We have a YouTube, so you need to.
Okay, for the YouTube, Duncan Blake International Aerospace Launch Policy Group. So there was mention made before of partnering with defence. I think there are very good reasons for defence to be interested in sovereign launch capability as well. So I've just emphasised that fact that there is an opportunity for partnering with defence.
That's a really fantastic comment. From this, I wanted to see if there's any more comments related to the defence and obviously getting the defence the table for specifically this launch capability. So, because we've heard from the public quite regularly that they want this capability, and we do see defence has to be a part of this. And I guess the question is, how would you see that occurring? I don't know if you, Tony, I'll give it. You had your chance to comment on the last one. I understand, but you were in the last.
About the strategic need. If you look at it, if we don't have a sovereign launch capability, that means any military type vehicle that gets launched, we have to hand it over to another country before it's launched. So I put it to him, I said, from a strategic point of view, how critical would it be that we had, whether it be DSTO, the Air Force, anybody, about having whatever hardware is launched be totally funded by Australians? And he said that's a really, really pertinent question.
Okay, I'd ask you to hold it there. Just please don't talk until I ask you to talk, please, because it's just respect for the rest of the people in the audience. Would anyone else like to build up on this launch capability aspect relating to the linking with defence, specifically relating to bringing a discussion with the defence going on? It's a really good question. It's a very common question that comes up. I'm guessing you're. Yeah, sorry, go on. Last time I asked the question, you said, I'm not going to answer that, and then you went to the next one, that's all. Oh, fantastic.
Yes. So I think on the civil side, what you could do, because I think to do something like this, it has to be funded for a defence strategic reason. It's not beat around the bush. But I think on the civil side, if you talk about matching a launch capability with, spectrum licensing through optical comms, for example, that's obviously a big, the advanced comms is a strategic priority for you. You're going to be investing in that. So you're going to have that capability growing, especially on the quantum side and everything else. And spectrum licensing is very difficult, especially for large civil commercial constellations. So if you try and combine a launch facility as a package with spectrum licensing, for example, and even test facilities, and then local manufacturers and things like that, you can start to bring a lot of money into Australia, which is really cool. It's not just about export, it's about import as well. And you have to give someone a reason to come here. It's so remote. It's beautiful as it is. It's very remote, and it's expensive to get here. So if maybe on the civil side, if you can, support the defence strategic need with a commercial proposal as well, I think it starts to get really, exciting.
All right, fantastic. It's a really good comment. Yes, to the gentleman at the front.
As Rowan George, Equatorial Launch Australia, and just reinforcing Anna Moore's comment there, that's exactly what ELA is doing at Armed Space Centre, and responding to both national and international customers, is providing that level of customer package. It's not just the launch so much that is the costly, it's the overall logistics cycle of going through all the approvals, going through all the licenses, getting logistics and transport, getting your export controls, and so as part of ELA at the Armed Space Centre, that's kind of what we're doing as a custom package.
Right, fantastic. Thank you. I know that you've asked a question, but I think the gentleman over here hasn't asked a question yet, so I might just pass it to him. Sorry. Yes. Actually, could you go back there?
I just want to add to some of the commentary around our launch capability in Australia. Sorry, James Stevenson again from KPMG. I can't speak for Defence, but some of the personnel from Defence that I have spoken to have expressed an interest through fundamental inputs to capability to have our own launch capability. I don't know that Defence necessarily wants to own that. Because of that FIC element, I believe that they have an interest in partnering with private enterprise to do this. It's certainly in their interest for capability. But for our national pride, it's important. We need to be able to launch our own equipment into space to show that we are capable of participating in this industry. Financially, maybe not so much. We can launch from our neighbours in New Zealand and elsewhere in the world, from what I understand. One of the bigger non-monetary barriers, as I'm led to understand, is around permits for launching off Earth and return to Earth. And acquiring those permits can be difficult and time-consuming. So being able to launch from our own land would circumvent some of those problems.
That's a really good point. Thank you very much. I do have a question relating to I'll pass it to you next, but I do have a question on the Trailblazer program specifically though. Do you guys see any other programs that you'd love to see that you would inspire Australians? Like really something that's there that, I did maybe forget to mention, this thing is going to go around the moon or on the moon. It's really trying to, this will be the first Australian product to actually get there. I know Australians have worked on missions that have gone to these areas before, but actually an Australian one, this will be the first time ever. Does anyone have any comments on what this could be? There's something that would inspire, that we're capable of doing? But we can go back to the launcher side as well.
Thank you. So back on the launch issue, it's not just Australia that needs a sovereign launch capabilities. The Five Eyes allies need that as well. And this is relevant because the sorts of things that they're looking for has common elements with the commercial sector. So I agree that a sovereign Australian launch capability wouldn't be something necessarily owned by Defence, but the civil sector can speak with Defence and ask, what are you looking for? When we fund, maybe the question you had earlier, could the Australian Space Agency fund launch opportunities? Well, speak to Defence before you do that and ask them what are they looking for and fund the launch opportunities that they're looking for as well. And things that are consistent with Five Eyes allies. So Five Eyes allies, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, they all need a sovereign launch capability. One big exercise that happens in Australia every 2 years is up in Rockhampton. That could be an opportunity for Defence, together with the civil sector, to try something out, to partner with NASA to say every 2 years, let's have a go at launching something and build over a series of exercises iteratively.
That's a really good idea. Thank you very much. The gentleman down here has a question.
Hi, Jeff. Hello? Is that coming through there?
Coming through or?
Hello? Hello?
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm from ANU. So I guess, the other Trailblazer project that's not launched that I think of a lot is resource utilization. So doing some kind of experiment, maybe not our own thing going to the moon, but part of something like Artemis where we've got experiments going, hey, here's how we can actually extract certain resources to use, especially if Moon to Mars is our goal, then we need to be able to use materials that are out there that I think should be one of our primary things in a way that we have a chance to contribute to that, specifically as Australia.
Fantastic.
Sorry, can I want to ask a follow-up question?
Please.
So can I ask a follow-up question back to you for that? So let's say we build something in Australia and we bolt it to a rover, which is whether it's ours or JAXA or whoever, it doesn't really matter. What should it be from your perspective?
Sample handling. Oh, there we go.
Sample handling is, Penny might have more of a response here. But I was going to say, learning how to work with the materials in microgravity as well, actually, like if you're trying to use them, how are your machines going to work once the dust is moving around? Like if you've got something and you're trying to powder rock and trying to, or maybe it needs water as a medium, like so you could have a bioreactor to start extracting nutrients out of and to grow crops out of. All these types of things, we don't know how that's going to work in microgravity. It's hard to do those experiments on Earth. That's the type of thing that we could be doing that's just bolted onto someone else's thing. It's not an enormous thing, but it could be an important part of it.
It's a really good suggestion. Please write it down, either in Slido or in a written consultation. It really helps.
I have written it on Slido.
Fantastic. But also please detail it as well and say, do we have experience here and this and this and this? That some of those details are really important because we would then obviously try and use this to contact you to start getting the partnerships working. Yes, the gentleman there.
Vincent, sorry, independent consultant, and I'm not a space guy, right? But
you will be by the end of this.
I think I might be. It's fascinating. What I would say is, it's obvious to focus on defence and security, but this is a civilian space agency. If you're going to try and inspire community, you need to try and have a vision that's going to inspire kids. You know, protecting people and killing people ain't that vision. And I think there's a risk here that if we just link those two things, that we're going to miss the opportunity to truly be visionary. Mm. And I would also add in, it's great to have 5 eyes, and that's wonderful. The future may look different, and I think we need to consider how we productively engage with, say, China. Clearly, they're well ahead on some of these things, okay? Let's not just be stuck in old paradigms, and let's also go into it with our eyes open. But that's my comment.
That's a really good comment. Thank you very much. Second, yes. I'm concerned of the time, so I'll probably take one. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question here? I saw that Sarah wanted to ask one. But is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Anyone who hasn't spoken yet? It's a really good time now to do it. I'd like to get your feedback. Anyone else? So this, we'll make this the last question then. But then, of course, afterwards we can discuss, and I'd love to hear further.
Just building on the earlier comment about agriculture, I was interested that kind of health and life sciences had fallen off your list of potential projects. So it was in the kind of demonstrator list, but not in the trailblazer list. And I would suggest that that is an area where, you know, if not your final one, you might want to think about having one of your initial 3, because it is an area where Australia, I think, can contribute some kind of unique and niche capability that we could contribute into a trailblazer kind of scale program.
Do you see any very specific programs that we could do? Just some good examples,
Things
I
about
guess?
remote medicine, for example, might be a good one for astronauts when they get to the moon. We're looking at 3D printing pharmaceuticals in its kind of early stages, so that might be another demonstrator that you could do. I think probably if you ask the medical science community, there'd be a long list.
But on the agriculture side, do you see anything from there? Because you mentioned agriculture as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, agriculture obviously is of relevance to Australia because of the arid environment possibilities for employing things that you develop for space back in Australia, right? And so building a bit on the comments about kind of Earth observation and things, I think it will be important that your trailblazer can demonstrate some kind of impact for Australia too, rather than just building industry capability. And obviously inspiring is great too, but if you could say, and then we can use this back on Earth for X, that will obviously be helpful too.
Right, so you'd like to see medicine, remote medicine and agriculture also be added to the themes of...
At least considered.
Considered. Thank you. Okay, so I'll leave it with this today. I'm hoping we've got everyone's comments, but as I said, there are many other ways that you can add your feedback, and the written consultation is a fantastic way to do this. But also as well for the Trailblazer, we'll go back anyway late this year to have another discussion specifically with what we'll do. So I'd like to say thank you very much for coming today. I know it's a lot of time out of your day, so I appreciate greatly for being here, and I appreciate all the feedback you've given as well. Would you like to say final words, Adam, or...?
Sure, thanks very much, Cam. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for contributing. It's been a really great discussion, and really appreciate people taking the effort, giving us the feedback on Slido. It will stay open for a little while, so you can go ahead and add some more comments if you've not. The closing date for the submission is Friday the 6th of March. So please make sure that you have your carefully written examples and feedback. Please make sure that you've got it submitted on our Consultation Hub website. And like I said before, you can make it confidential if you would like to share with us some commercial in confidence type information, and we will obviously hold that sensitively. Your input has been extremely valuable, and it's extremely important to make sure we get the design of this right. As I mentioned earlier, in September, October 2018, I stood in this same spot seeking input on the design of the International Space Investment Initiative, and that's been a hugely powerful program for us. You know, we've had lots of applications, and we're assessing those grant applications now. I think part of the reason for the success of that program is we took the time to travel around Australia and get that input. This is a much bigger program. It's much more important for us nationally, and so your input is critical to the success. So thanks very much. And thanks, Cam, for presenting today. On the other team. Thank you also to the rest of the team. We've just got Tom, who's done a fantastic job organising this and the other events as well. Sue, Joe here today. Also, Eliza's just snuck in at the last moment. So thanks, everyone. Cheers. Oh, and thank you.